This season of What's Her Name is sponsored by the Women's History Initiative at the Utah Historical Society. Utah women's history is so much more than you think. history.utah.gov/women. And by our patrons, Kaylee Brown, Kim Hokinson, Bree Smith, Robin Brown, Carrie Gilbride, Courtney Boise, Monique Harris-Pixato, Bree Alto, Skylar Collins, Cornelia Weiss, Jan Elise Cannon, Heather Justin, Chantel Oliver, Maria Sanchez, Amanda Gilmore, Jill Harrigan, Michaela Frew, Valerie Jacobson, Heather McKinnon, Jamie Lang, Sarah Mikado, and Caitlin McTaggart. Thank you so much for being our patrons. We couldn't do it without you. You can become a patron for as little as $1 a month to help make more episodes happen. Hi, Olivia. Hi, Katie. 1953, Santiago, Chile. Ooh, cool. Nicanor Parra, a renowned physicist, cosmologist, and poet. He's just returned home to Santiago after 2 years studying in Oxford. Mm-hmm. He sits surrounded by piles of paper, like a true scholar. He's poring over these century-old Chilean poems, sort of like broadside ballads. And he's searching for the vestiges of a lost Chilean past. And I relate to him so much because this is exactly what I did for my dissertation, writing about Tudor musicians.
I was going to say, that seems very familiar.
These broadside ballads are like these treasures of the past because it's oral tradition that happened to get printed. He's studying away when in walks his sister, Violeta. "What you reading?" And he tells her. And she says, "You study something like that?" He says, "Well, yes, these are the lost voice of the poor and marginalized in Chilean history." He picks one up and he reads it to her. And she goes, "Oh yeah, I know this one." And she proceeds to sing him the melody that accompanies the verse. As far as he knew, nobody knew that the melodies could be known. He pulls out another one. "Yes, she knows this one too." And she sings that one. And Violeta says, "But these are the songs the drunkards sing." He goes, "No, this is lost history of the unrecorded and illiterate in Chile's past." She goes, "Well, they're not lost, brother. I learned these songs in the boliches of Chillán when we were kids." And in that moment, Violeta Parra found her calling. "These songs are endangered," she says. "These songs are important. These songs are the heart and soul of what it means to be Chilean." Then she's gonna go and collect them. Violeta Parra was the right woman at the right time. And she collected literally thousands of songs.
Cool.
And here's my favorite example of how she did it. One day, maybe the late 1950s, Sergio Larraín, the most renowned photographer in Chile, wanted to follow her for a day and document her work. And she takes him to the roughest part of Santiago, into a working class boliche, like the dive of all dive bars. And as they walk in, the level of danger and despair is palpable for Sergio. He fears for his safety. Violeta reassures him. They get their drinks, they sit down. And Violeta starts drumming on the table with her hands and starts singing a song. Little by little, all the men in the bar slowly join in until she has a booming choir. And Sergio later said, this is his quote, "They sang beautiful songs. They were guys who seemed very dejected, but that's where the music was." None of the other intellectuals and academics involved in the folk revival knew or dared to go where Violeta Parra went to collect the heart and soul of Chile. And really, Violeta Parra's life as a collector and performer of folk music, folk traditions, a folklorista is what it's called in Chile. That was just one aspect of her absolutely wild ride of a life. She was a composer and an artist. She was a radio host and an absolute firebrand. She broke 48 guitars over people's heads, apparently. And she is a beloved icon in Chile today. Her life was packed with joy and sorrow, as she wrote in her most iconic song, Gracias a la Vida. So, let's get this show on the road. There is so much to talk about. I'm Katie Nelson.
And I'm Olivia Mickle.
And this is What's Her Name?
Fascinating women you've never heard of.
Que sin ser autorizado en su verso sin apoyo. Y aquí mismo hoy día todo les doy cancha, tiro y lao.
Our guide today is Professor Ericka Verba, author of a new biography on Violeta Parra called Thanks to Life.
My name's Ericka Verba, and I'm Director and Professor of Latin American Studies at California State University, Los Angeles. I was a founding member of two bands, Sabia and then Desborde, and Desborde 2.0 is back. So we feel like, especially right now, people need music. So
Professor Verba's life was changed years ago when her neighbors were Chilean political refugees.
So I was a sophomore in college. This was 1974, and I met a Chilean family. They were refugees from the military dictatorship. They were musicians, and they were very active in the solidarity movement with Chile, or in their case, the resistance to dictatorship. And music was a really important part of the solidarity movement. And this family had all of these albums of protest music that they had smuggled out of Chile. So the way they smuggled the music out was they bought brand new military band albums, and they put their albums of protest music inside, and then they very carefully ironed the plastic sleeve closed again so it looks like they had never been opened. And that's how they got them out of the country when the military coup happened. The musicians that were still in the country ended up in concentration camps, or most famously, like Victor Jara, ended up dead. So you can tell this was a political awakening for me as well, which really did shape the rest of my life, because I went on to study Latin American studies. I ended up being in a group that performed solidarity music, not just with Chile, but also with Central America in the 1980s, raising funds for Nicaragua and El Salvador and Guatemala and Honduras. So it really did shape my life, meeting this family. And one of the first songs that I learned was a Violeta Parra song.
Her fate was sealed. Ericka Verba was to become a Violetologist, or a Violeta maniac, which is what her many thousands of devoted fans are called today.
Her legacy is really this incredible, prolific body of work that she has left the world. In Chile, Violeta Parra is incredibly well known. The equivalent of the Grammy Award in Chile is called the Violeta Parra Award. To be very clear, she's very well known in Latin America, and it's because of the power of her songs. And so her most famous song is called Gracias a la Vida, which is what gave my book its title, Thanks to Life. And it's been recorded in 14 different languages.
It's been covered by Casey Musgraves, Yo-Yo Ma, Shakira, Joan Baez, K-pop. I mean, this song is everywhere. This one song alone, that would have been enough to secure her global fame. It's a transcendent song about the universalities of love and hope and pain, and being grateful for it all. But Gracias a la Vida was almost her swan song. It was the result of a long, hard life, and all the love and hope, pain, and beauty. So we'll get there in the end, but let's start at the start. She was born October 4th, 1917.
She's born in a tiny little town called San Fabián de Alico. And then her family's very itinerant, like many families in the early 20th century in Chile, because they're poor, they're not doing so well. And then when she's around 10, they end up landing in a place called Chillán. So she always referred to herself as a chianeja, or a woman from Chillán. Her mother is a campesina, or a peasant, a woman from a family that got up every morning and worked the fields. And so in the summer, she would hike and visit her relatives in this tiny little town called Huape, which is where her mother was from. And she would learn songs that had been handed down literally since the colonial period. You can trace some of the songs she learned to medieval Spain. Really rich folk tradition that was still oral. And also her father loves arias and he has some musical training. He's a school teacher, so he's really one of the intellectuals of the city because he knows something. He's from a family that has more money. They're notables, you would call them notables, right? So she has the campesina side and then this kind of middle class, educated side. So she absorbs all of this. And then, but very tragically, her father dies when she's 13, and it coincides with the Depression.
The Great Depression. Did you know it hit Chile worst of all nations in the world?
What?
I did not know that.
And in Chile, there's a saying that if the U.S. catches a cold, Latin America catches pneumonia. So in Chile, thousands of miners were thrown out of work because the price of copper just fell. Like it had no value. So there's thousands of miners roaming the country looking for work. And there's a lot of hunger and really difficult times. And Violeta Parra, who's a member of a family of 10 children, well, all of the children figure out ways to survive, really, is what happens. Because the mother is left widowed. She's a seamstress, but nothing really, it's not enough. And so Violeta Parra gets the wonderful idea of going out and singing for her supper. She already knew how to play guitar and sing because her father was a musician, and she says that she basically broke into his guitar case because he kept it under lock and key and taught herself how to play guitar. That is the family legend. So 4 of the young siblings go out onto the street and start playing for their supper. And it gets even better because so they're playing around the town and the marketplace, and they end up playing where all the brothels are. But they don't really know what's going on. It's only afterwards that they realize kind of where they were playing.
These 4 little kids busking on the street in the red light district. And they had no idea where they were.
They just know that's where the people are the most generous.
Yeah. And they're coming home with not money, but with food. Like they have a basket out and people are giving them things like corn and squash, like foodstuffs to take home. Thus, Violeta Parra begins feeding her family at the ripe old age of 13. But it's not enough. So, what do we do when times get hard and we have no money whatsoever, and it's in the 1930s? We join the circus, of course.
Oh, of course.
Then they end up joining a series of family circuses. They're called, literally, El Circo Pobre. In Chile, they're called the Poor Circus. And it means 2 things. It means that they're poor, right? They're just a small family traveling around. And it also kind of reflects the quality of their acts, because there's so few people in the circus that they have to do everything. So, as one clown described themselves, they were everythingists. They were todistas. They were everythingists.
What a word. The 4 oldest Parra children, they're becoming everythingists in the Poor Circus.
Cool.
They took the tickets and they were contortionists and then they were musicians, and which kind of you can't be good at everything. So that's why they're also poor circuses. But you can see how foundational it is. Before she's even finished high school or even started high school, she's already a professional musician. She's touring, for that matter. She's learned all sorts of folk songs without even trying because they're sort of part of her repertoire growing up. And she knows how to fend for herself, which is, a big part of things.
Violeta's brother Roberto, he later recalled their years in the Poor Circus as great fun, full of adventures. One event that would change the course of her identity was a smallpox epidemic when she was a kid.
She had smallpox when she was a child, so her face was pockmarked. And people in Chile were pretty open, sort of voicing the fact that they considered her unattractive because of this, I guess, what they considered a deformation. As one radio host said, she was hermosa, the más hermosamente fea, the most beautifully ugly person. But they really did describe her as ugly. So she was not the only person to use the word fea or ugly in terms of referring to herself.
Later, she called herself the ugliest woman in the world. But she wrote an autobiographical poem later in life. And here's what she wrote about being the ugliest woman in the world. She says, I give thanks to God that I'm ugly and have well-established habits. If not, what strange distractions might enter into the struggle? Singing is beautifully wondrous and better still with a guitar. Without cosmetics or pretense, the songstress can undertake to sing to the dawning day like the little sparrow does. So she counted her ugliness as a blessing. For whatever psychological reasons we could infer.
Yeah.
She rejected all notions of tending to one's appearance. She didn't style her hair, you know. However, when she was older and becoming famous, she loved to wear her childhood patchwork dresses that her mom had sewn for her out of scraps. So she's very clearly identifying as poor and ugly. Well, things changed for the Parra siblings when the oldest brother, Nicanor, he went off to college in Santiago. He's clearly very bright. He's going places.
Her brother gets a scholarship to go to Santiago. That's how he fends for himself. He goes to this very fancy boarding school in Santiago, the capital of Chile, that's just palatial. The Barros Arana boarding school, and a former president of Chile came out of it, all sorts of prizes in literature and science. It's really formidable. And of course, it's for boys only. And he does something that is very typical of migration patterns. He brings his siblings one at a time. The oldest sibling brings the rest of his family, little one by one. And Violeta Parra is the first person he brings of all of his siblings because he figured she might be the best student. And she is put into a teacher training school, which is really the one profession that she can go in. That's, for mujeres decentes, for respectable women, right? Because it's teaching.
He sends a letter to Violeta. Leave the guitar behind. You're going to become a teacher now. And he sends her the fare to get to Santiago. Well, she rolls up at the gates of his luminous school, and he says she stood there with guitar in hand and no suitcase. Like, clothes are not important.
Wow.
She enrolls in teacher training school.
But she hates it. She drops out after 2 years and begins playing in
the bars of Santiago. And as her other siblings join them one by one, they also join her in playing in the bars.
And so they're playing Mexican corridos, they're playing Argentine rancheros, and they're playing valses from Peru. And they learn them from the radio and from records. So they're playing sort of, I guess, a songbook of Latin American popular music. And that's how they make a living. And they're kind of she's in a duo with her sister. They're called the Parra sisters, and they are recording with Arcia Victor a couple of singles, and they're on the radio, so they're getting pretty popular.
Ven adorado querer, ven adorado querer, que mis ojos vierten lágrimas de amor, un abrazo quiero darte, porque el adorarte ha sido una ilusión, si es que tienes corazón. Compadécete de mí, que mis sufrimientos, ay, 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 son tan solo para ti. Vuelve el amor a tu pecho, no desdeñes mi pasión, que mi alma enamorada ha sido una ilusión.
And it's in a dive bar near the railroad that Violeta spies a young guy in the audience. At this point, she's 19, he's 17. He works for the railroad. He made funny faces at her. And they fell in love.
Aww.
They married in 1938. They had 2 daughters. But as it turned out, he's a very traditional man's man. His woman will not work. But Violeta discovers she does not thrive as a housewife, and she does not want to stop working. Instead, she becomes, as you do, a flamenco dancer. Cool. She bills herself as faithfully interpreting Spanish folklore. She adopts a Castilian accent, the whole thing, and she does this for 10 years.
Wow.
Her husband is toxic, constant fighting. She eventually does divorce him, and she gives the entire 10 years, the whole marriage, just one verse in her poem. Here's what she says. Probably relatable to many divorcees out there. After 10 years had passed and I was skin and bones, the cinch wrapped 3 times around, the reins were cut at last. And so to regain my path again, I took up the guitar, forcefully, Violeta Parra,
Wow.
She moves in with her big brother Nicanor in a sort of like compound in Santiago. Even though she departed to become forcefully Violeta Parra, in reality she's almost never alone. She is constantly has husbands and lovers. And they are always younger than her. It also becomes clear to her family that she has suicidal tendencies. But she also has these high highs. So today, I think we would probably say bipolar. Back then, yeah, there wasn't a label for her back then.
Fiery artist temperament is what they called it.
Yes. She's in a duo with her sister, the Sisters Parra. They're quite popular. They do this big performance called Greetings from the Land of Mexico, where they're being Mexican.
Yep. They're everythingists.
Yeah,
They're
exactly.
everywhereists.
She dances the mambo for a while and is from Cuba. And then, in 1953, she has that fateful conversation with her brother Nicanor and finds her calling as a folklorista. And she goes, wait, these Chilean bar songs, these are important? And she becomes a folklorista.
This is when Violeta Parra becomes Violeta Parra. Like, this is the absolute turning point, and she becomes a folklorista, which in Spanish means two things. You're a folklorist and a folk singer. It's about 1952. She spends the next 8 years. She goes all over the country collecting music. She's collecting from older people who can remember things that they learned when they were children.
La vida ya aquí se acaba esta cueca. La vida ya aquí la remato yo.
So she goes out. She collects thousands of songs. Literally, they think she collected at least 2,000 songs. But it's the turning point, because instead of performing music because it's what people want, she embraces the notion of creating things that are authentic. You know, when you're playing popular music in a bar, the music, it has value because people like it and they want to hear it. When you're playing authentic music, it has value in and of itself because of what it stands for, what it means. And then you bring it to people and you bring them something authentic. It's like she's shifting value systems.
Two anecdotes from this time period I love. One, she doesn't know how to read or write musical notation. She's completely self-taught. She invents her own musical notation so that she can write down the songs. Amazing. My second favorite anecdote, the godfather of all folk musicians, this keeper of the flame. He's this old man known as the Prophet. He lives in rural Puente Alto, north of Santiago. And she's won over other people before, but the Prophet will be the ultimate test. And, as everyone knows, this bardic tradition, this is not for girls. It requires playing the guitarron, which is like this huge 25-string guitar. That also, not for girls. So she makes her pilgrimage to the home of the prophet. She stands on his porch and introduces herself by playing a song. He answers with a song. And they spend the rest of the day just playing songs back and forth. She leaves. The next day, she shows up, suitcase in hand, and informs him that she will not be leaving his house until he has taught her to play the guitarron. And it worked.
Wow.
And once she had won over the prophet and learned everything he had to teach her, he connected her to the network of sort of elderly folk singers, like the old guard. And she visited all of them and collected all of this cultural heritage that was about to be lost.
She's incredibly successful because she's so stubborn and energetic. People say that she can get the most recalcitrant older person to sing songs just for her.
Él no come trigo, caramba, ni tampoco arroz.
These are the poorest of the poor, often. She lived with them. She ate their simple food, helped with the chores. She was one of them. And that's what made them open up to her. She wasn't some stuffy intellectual who's, I've come to analyze whether what you have is worthy. Instead, she's like, helping them on the farm or doing the dishes and then also learning from them.
Dejándome sola, caramba, se voló y se fue. Dejándome sola, caramba, se voló y se fue.
This is a moment of spiritual awakening, I would say, for her. And it's also absolutely historical. It doesn't happen sort of out of the blue. It happens in the middle of a folk revival in Chile. And this folk revival is happening in Chile, but it's also happening in England, and it's also happening in the United States. If you think of the Weavers, Woody Guthrie, actually people compare it to Woody Guthrie. She says it's a good comparison. So, it's really happening all over the world. And the reason there's folk revivals in the 1950s all over the world is because the music really is dying out.
Dejándome sola, caramba, se voló y se fue. Dejándome sola, caramba, se voló y se fue.
This season of What's Her Name is sponsored by the Women's History Initiative at the Utah Historical Society. Think you know Utah history? Think again.
The Women's History Initiative highlights Utah's dynamic history makers. 8 sovereign nations in Utah since time immemorial.
Pioneers, explorers, immigrants, entrepreneurs, visionaries, and dreamers who have made a home there ever since.
Did you know Utah women were the first in the U.S. to vote under an equal suffrage law? All the way back in 1870?
Visit history.utah.gov/women to learn more. And in 1953, none other than Pablo Neruda, Nobel Prize winner, he hosted her debut recital at his house.
What?
She played the songs that she'd been collecting. Instantly, people saw something that they had never seen before. She proved that they were wrong. Everyone had this common belief that Chilean culture was void of the richness that the other countries had. And before the year was out, she had her own radio show, Violeta Parra Sings, where she's singing the music of rural Chileans, sort of serving it up for everyone, like, this is who we are.
She becomes incredibly popular, not just where the radio station reaches, really the people whose songs she's singing right into the radio station and say, thank you for playing our music. And they truly appreciate her. They call her Violeta. They call her by her name, or La Violetita. And when she shows up in a town, they say, La Violeta is here. So they really, she has a following. And she actually wins. And it's the only prize she really earns in her lifetime. She earns the prize for being the best folklorista from the Association of the Chilean Press. So it's a huge deal. And because she's becoming so renowned almost overnight, her brother says, yeah, I went away on vacation in the summer. I came back and the whole city's talking about my sister, Violeta, what just happened because of the radio show. And it's just a hit.
At this point, she's married to husband number 2. She has 3 kids, 2 daughters, then she's got a son, Angel, and a little baby, Rosa, born in 1954.
She's invited to participate in the Chilean delegation to the World Festival of Youth and Students in Warsaw, Poland in 1955.
This is her big chance. So just 1 week after she's received her big award, she packs up for Warsaw. Rosa is just 6 months old at the time. So this is a really tough choice. She's still breastfeeding. Do I take her with me? Do I leave her behind? She decides she's going to leave all of her children together in the care of her husband. She's like, I'll be back in a matter of weeks. She takes the bronze statue of her award with her. And they say she carried it everywhere with her. And in it, I see a kind of desperation to be appreciated. See, I'm meaningful. I'm somebody. I'm worthy. Yeah. But when the festival in Warsaw was over, she didn't go home. Lots of the musicians were talking about heading to Paris. Paris, they said, was the place for Latin American musicians. So she goes to Paris. The Latin American cultural revival was happening in Paris. And there's this fascinating reason. We already said that during this time there were folk revivals happening all over the world. But the blaring exceptions are Germany and France.
Germany and France do not have folk revivals in the 50s. And the hypothesis is that the Nazis made the word folk so absolutely abhorrent that it was like hard to have a folk revival at the time. What they did instead was they picked up on the US folk revival and they embraced Latin American music, but they don't really have their own folk revival. What happens is these Latin American musicians head to Paris, where Paris in the 1950s, to quote Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who is there writing his book, 100 Years of Solitude, that will win him the Nobel Prize, it was the capital of Latin America. It's amazing. Violeta Parra is making her living playing Latin American music in a bar where Gabriel Garcia Marquez and Jesus Soto are performing as a duo. And anyway, so it's just a pretty exciting time to be a Latin American folk musician in Paris. The kind of folk music that many of us associate with Latin America really, in a sense, is born in Paris. It's a kind of music where you mix the Venezuelan cuatro, which is a 4-string guitar from Venezuela and very percussive, with the Andean quena, which is a flute. And, a Venezuelan musician is not going to meet a Bolivian musician in either Venezuela or Bolivia. They're going to meet them in a club in Paris. And she's part of this process. Only she's so stubborn, she'll only play Chilean music. So they call her La Chilean in the club, and they're kind of a little upset when she gets there because she's a little bit less fun than the other musicians. She's very serious. She wants people to be quiet and listen to her, which is really not the scene. But anyway, so she's in Paris and she's making a living playing music, which is very hard to do anywhere else at the time, playing Latin American music. It's also, I'm talking sort of about her accomplishments. Her life was very hard. One of the things that happens while she's gone, she left her daughter about 6 months, Rosa Clara, in the care of her then husband. And the child dies.
Rosa died of pneumonia in the arms of her 12-year-old brother, Angel, as he and his dad raced to the hospital in a taxi.
She learns about it about 2 months in, and she doesn't come back. She doesn't come back for a year and a half. And so I mean, she has 3 other children, but she still doesn't come back. I can't imagine anything harder than losing a child, a baby. So that's one of the parts of her life. So that's, her life is hard. It's also, how should I put this? It wasn't as unusual to lose a child in infancy in Chile in the 1950s as it might be now. In fact, some of the songs and rituals that she became most familiar with and most known for, one of them are the songs that are sung at what's called Awake for the Little Angel, which was a ritual from the Chilean countryside that was what you did when a baby died before baptism. And you would dress the baby up, the corpse of the baby at that point, like an angel, and build an altar that had sky behind it and sing to the baby and let the baby know, the deceased baby, that now they were going to be in heaven and that they shouldn't cry. The mother shouldn't cry because it would put tears on the wings of the baby and she wouldn't be able to rise, or he wouldn't be able to rise to heaven. And so they had an entire ritual of consolation, of solace for parents who lost their children because it was so common, is what, I'm trying to make out. And that doesn't, the fact that she stayed away for a year and a half is something that was criticized by people in Chile, and certainly probably shaped her children. I would imagine their children's life. And at the same time, I would like to point out, because one of the sort of confining circles of Violeta Parra's life was that she was a woman. I'd like to point out that her brother, Nicanor Parra, got a scholarship to study in Oxford for 2 years, left his wife with 3 children for those 2 years, came back with a younger wife who is Swedish, and then no one ever says, oh my God, what a terrible father he is. That just wasn't, it was the mother's responsibility to raise children. So which is why what Violeta Parra did was such an anomaly. If she had been a man, it would have not been an anomaly, I don't think.
One thing she wrote about her Paris experience was something so familiar to me, and I wonder if it's familiar to most people who have moved to and lived in a foreign country, which is sort of rediscovering where you came from by dint of living somewhere else. Here's what she says in her poem. Before I had ever left Chile, I didn't comprehend the value of being Chilean. Oh my, now I do understand. Everything shifts on the way back to Chile. She's on the boat, this liminal space between worlds. The loss, the going away, finding out who you are, finding out where you came from, the returning. And on the boat, she picks up her guitar and she starts to compose something completely different.
On this ocean liner going back to Chile, she starts making these incredible compositions that can only be described as modern. They're atonal, they play around with the rhythms, and they're very connected to Chilean folklore, but they completely flip it, and they just sort of carry it to completely new places. And so she comes back to Chile, and she's like known as a folklorista, and suddenly she's inventing new styles of music. And she wrote another piece called El Gavilán, the Sparrowhawk. It's about 12 minutes long. She performs it on voice and guitar.
Wow. Some people call this her unequivocal masterpiece.
But she wants it to be an entire folk opera dance. She's got, it's going to be the modern dance troupe. It's not ballet. It's a modern dance troupe because Chile now in the 1950s now has its first modern dance troupe. And she knows which dancers she wants to dance the parts. And she wants it to have folk instruments, but also a full symphony. She has colossal plans. And she would sing the main part because it needed to be a voice that understood suffering. And conservatory singers don't understand suffering, but she did. So she'd have to be the star. Anyway, so she's writing these amazing pieces of modern music. She's doing soundtracks for experimental film. She gets hepatitis and she starts embroidering. She has no money, so at one point Isabel, her daughter, comes home and finds that there's no sheets and there's no curtains because her mom needed more cloth. And she was in one of her, as what one Argentine friend called it, her Picasso stage. She was just going crazy, producing things. So she's doing visual art. She's doing sculpture out of clay. She's doing wire sculptures. And this goes on for a while. In my book, I call it her volcanic period because her brother wrote a beautiful poem called Defense of Violeta Parra, where he describes her as volcanic Violeta.
She's teaching summer classes at a university, but she's a little too ferocious at her students. She helps curate an exhibit at the Museum of Folk Art. I mean, she is trying everything, but she's volcanic. And I don't know who thought to keep a tally, but this is where we get the statistic that she broke 48 guitars over people's heads.
Her guitar maker was keeping
Yeah.
Yeah,
She's
go! Do another one!
Yep, exactly. She's never stable. She's always moving. As her children grow into young adults, they're recruited into her projects. They're jobbing musicians too. In one interview, I love this, a journalist asked her if she'd had any formal musical training. She replied, "No, but if I had, I would be the Bach of Chilean music."
Wow, that's an interesting person to choose.
Yeah.
Very formal.
Yes, and ordered.
Yeah.
And like rules and forms.
Yeah. But also he famously, composed at the kitchen table surrounded by children. So maybe that was her methodology too, that he was fast.
It came to him.
Efficient.
Yeah.
It just
cranked
came
it out
and he wrote it down.
Yeah. And then, of course, there were these periods where she'd have immobilizing depression. She wouldn't leave her bed for weeks. But also, she's never living alone. She's not shutting people out. So she would sort of hold court from bed. Like, she would invite people to join her. And they would, like, hang out with her in her bed.
That's beautifully healthy, actually. I mean,
Yeah. I think she knew she should never be alone.
Yeah.
And I'm glad she wasn't. She takes another trip back to Europe. She brings along a documentary filmmaker. Why don't you record my rise in Europe? But instead, it all falls apart. Not only is there no rise, there's no documentary. You know, she's back and forth, Europe, South America. She's entangled with all these lovers. All the lovers are sort of crumbling under the force that is Violeta Parra. She is larger than life. She fully believes she is.
Cuando canto de improviso, cuando canto de improviso con algún cantor de vena.
Here's another anecdote I love. She was touring southern Chile with her children in a band. This is May 1960. And there was these rumbling little earthquakes, like tremors, for 2 days. And people were starting to get really nervous. Violeta Parra marched into the local telegraph office. She dictates a telegram. She says, "Send the earthquake once and for all. Stop. Because the world needs fixing. Stop." The telegraph operator asks for the intended recipient, and Violeta says, "Send it to God." He laughed and he says, "I'll do my best to get this message sent. Don't worry about payment. I'll collect it on the other end." 2 hours later, the strongest earthquake in recorded history struck Chile. It measured 9.5 on the Richter scale.
No.
It lasted 10 minutes. It was followed by a tsunami. The devastation was beyond description. She eventually wrote a song about it called Puerto, Montt is Trembling. And it reveals something from deep in the core of Violeta, I think. Puerto Montt is trembling with furious resentment, and I am witness to a world that is ending. I was in my hotel room up on the second floor when a hailstorm erupted from that fierce purgatory, wash basins and mirrors sliding down the walls. Lord, could you perhaps calm down for just a bit? And he responds, irate, as you sow, you shall reap.
Se me acabó la paciencia y hay que limpiar este trigo.
It seems like her personal relationship with God is fraught.
Yeah.
She sees a punishing God.
Yeah, and is that message for her
Mm-hmm.
or for the world?
Yes.
Did you personally bring this on, Violeta?
Yeah. Why is God irate?
Se me borró el pensamiento, mis ojos no son los míos. Puedo perder el sentido de un momento a otro momento. Mi confusión va en aumento.
Then, early 1960s, post-earthquake. She makes an interesting pivot. She's been making tapestries for some years now, totally self-taught, of course. And she's on another trip to Paris.
She's in Paris and she decides that she should have a solo show in the Museum of Modern Art because she's playing with some musicians that are also artists and they just were part of a group show. And so she asked the Chilean ambassador to write to the director of the Museum of Modern Art and saying, you know, that Violeta Parra is in Paris and she would like to have a show, something to that effect. And the head of the Museum of Modern Art, in a very, I would say, sexist sort of and colonialist way, decides that no, she's not modern. I think partly because she was so identified with sort of Latin American folk culture. She was sort of seen as indigenous, even though she wasn't. She was sort of so exotic. Picasso can be inspired by folklore and be be modern, but she could be inspired by folklore, and she becomes folkloric herself. So she wasn't, he said no, nah. But he did send her to the Museum of Decorative Arts. And so she meets with the director and he likes it. And so she got very excited, especially because the Museum of Decorative Arts is housed in the Louvre Palace. So she could say she was in the Louvre, which she did, by the way. And then I guess he brought her in front of a committee and they said, she's not that well known. I don't think this is going to work. And so she's devastated. She hears that it's not going to happen. And she writes a letter to a friend. She's saying, what was I thinking? The exact quote is, how could I have an exhibit at the Louvre? I, who am the ugliest woman on the planet, who come from a tiny country from Chilean at the end of the earth. What was I thinking that I could have a solo show in the Louvre? And that became the question that my biography answers. And it is really a great question because she is from the south of Chile, from a very small town. So the whole biography sort of tried to answer the question, how does this woman get from the small town of Chilean in the south of Chile all the way to the Louvre Museum in Paris in the last years of her life? And I also want people to notice her personality, because how many people have ever sort of sat around saying, shucks, I'm not going to have a show in the Louvre. That really sucks. I mean, who thinks that? Who thinks I'm going to have a show in the Louvre to begin with, so that you can be disappointed when it doesn't happen, right? And of course it does happen anyway.
She is the first Latin American to have a solo show at the Museum of Decorative Arts at the Louvre.
Wow.
She was at the museum every single day for the 5 weeks that this exhibit ran. She had Chilean food on offer. She sang and performed. She was doing everything she could to level up her career, to leverage this moment, to turn it into something bigger. And in the end, nothing really came of it. Curators from other galleries were like, yeah, send us your stuff. But it was one item here or there. And so in the end, she has this huge show. I mean, this is a huge accomplishment.
Yeah.
But in the end, when it doesn't become something bigger, then she's really crushed. I feel like this is such a poignant example of how in life, you dream big, then those dreams come true. Then you dream bigger, and maybe you just keep dreaming bigger until it doesn't come true. When will you be satisfied?
¿Cuál es mi pecado? A maltratarme, sí. A maltratarme.
And she records an album of political songs that's not released in her lifetime, but that really has some of her most important songs on it. And when it is finally released in the 1970s in Chile, it's monumentally influential to Chilean musicians. So when it's released, it's called Songs Re-Encountered in Paris. So she's just incredibly active again in Paris, returns to Chile in 1965, and the last 2 years of her life are truly, I would say, challenging in terms of her mental health. There's also mental illness, and I say this with I think I want to say authority, because she committed suicide. She committed suicide at age 49, 2 months after releasing an album that has her most famous songs on it, her most enduring songs, including Gracias a la Vida, Thanks to Life. The Rolling Stones of Chile has deemed it the best album of all times in Chilean music. The album is released in November. She commits suicide the following February with a gun that she smuggled back from Bolivia when she was visiting her lover there. And I think it's hard to explain suicide without mental illness. Someone explained to me that when people commit suicide, it's not because they want to die, it's because they want the pain to stop.
Gracias a la vida que me ha dado tanto, me dio dos luceros que cuando los abro, perfecto distingo lo negro del blanco. Y en el alto cielo su fondo estrellado, en las multitudes el hombre que yo amo.
And since then, there was immediate sort of acknowledgement of the incredible talent that had died in Chile. And then ever since, people have, I think, been memorializing her and recognizing her music and honoring her, really ever since her death. Violeta Parra was very passionate, so really it seems like she was never without a man. She was also such a gender rebel because men in Chilean culture, especially musicians, I would say, absolutely have a license sort of to sleep around, and she pretty much acted like them. She had a tremendous sense of who she was. So she was, she broke all the rules. Her political songs are part of people's repertoire. So, there's the feminist movement in Chile and the student movement in Chile. She's one of their icons, and they will use her music.
And when you know all that, this whole incredible story, and you listen to Gracias a la Vida, you hear the swan song of a universal human experience.
Gracias a la Vida is a song where she gives thanks for all of her senses, because they've given her the words that she uses, because they give her the sounds that guide her. Her tired feet, because they take her all over the country to all of these different places and to the patio of the man she loves. For some reason in these last months, I've really needed this one line in her song. So this is the last verse of her song. Gracias a la vida que me ha dado tanto, me ha dado la risa y me ha dado el llanto. Así yo distingo dicha de quebranto, los dos materiales que forman mi canto. Y el canto de ustedes que es el mismo canto. Y el canto de todos que es mi propio canto. And that means, thanks to life for all it has given me. It has given me laughter. It has given me tears. And so I distinguish joyfulness from sorrow. The materials that together make up my song. And your song, which is the same song. And everyone's song, which is my own song.
Gracias a la vida que me ha dado tanto.
Lately, I've been so conscious that life is made up of dicha and quebranto, of joyfulness and sorrow. So I'm a musician. I've been playing music with some of the same people since I was 16. And like in the late 1990s, we did a tribute concert to Violeta Parra songs. We put on a concert with 14 musicians, 21 of her songs, musicians from 4 continents here in LA. It's sold out. And when my book came out, almost 30 years later, we had a book release concert with 9 of the 14 musicians that were at the original concert. The women were in a girls' night out that's been going on for over 40 years. We've been at our marriages. Some of us we've been at the memorials of our husbands. And the week of the concert was the week of the fires in LA. And 2 of the 9 musicians, they're a couple, they lost their house in the fire. I got a text from Gary on a Tuesday around 2 o'clock saying, we're evacuating, don't worry, we have the instruments we're using for the concert in our car. But they clearly didn't realize what was about to happen because they had 2 cars, they only took 1, and they had other instruments in the house that they did not take out. And their house, within 5 hours, their house had burnt to the ground with everything in it, along with thousands of other houses in our city. And that was a Tuesday. On Saturday, we rehearsed. And I was like, do Gary and Libby want us to rehearse? And they were staying with their sisters who also plays in the concert. And so they were saying, no, they want to. And the night of the concert, I don't know how to explain this, but joy and sorrow. It was a joyous day. I don't know how we did it. It was January 25th of this year. And we're going to do our last song of the whole evening, which is standing room only, just all ages, just a really amazing evening. We're about to play the last song, which of course, what's going to be the last song of a concert about a book called Thanks to Life? It's going to be Gracias a la Vida. Everyone has the words. We're all going to sing it together. And I've just thanked everyone because what a perfect time to thank people. And I realized that my E string of my guitar is tuned down to a D and I have to turn it up. So what we do in those moments is someone else is going to cover for me because there's this silence. And Libby, one of our band members who doesn't really share much usually, she's very matter-of-fact kind of person. whose house had burned down a week ago, gets on the mic and says, and I'm crying, but she says that she lost everything. Her house burnt down, but that rehearsing with us and being in the concert had brought her great joy. So it's all joy and sorrow. I think all of us become very, very aware of that. And at different points in our lives, we're very more in touch than others of how much life is woven by those two materials and how connected those two materials are. I'm very conscious of how fragile life is these last few months. I think that's why these words mean so much to me. And so I distinguish joyfulness from sorrow, the materials that together make up my song and your song, which is the same song, and everyone's song, which is my own song.
Gracias. Muchas gracias.
Special thanks to Ericka Verba, whose new book is called Thanks to Life, a Biography of Violeta Parra. Highly recommend it. The music for this episode was, of course, Violeta Parra herself, including 4 tracks recorded by Alan Lomax as part of the Lomax Digital Archive, used with kind permission, and Las Hermanas Parra, recorded for RCA Victor in 1952, and, of course, Ericka Verba's tribute band, Desborde. You can find more information on erickaverba.com, including a Spotify playlist created by Ericka Verba, following along the story of her life in the book. Additional music was composed by Doug Maxwell, Quincas Moreira, Kevin MacLeod, Jesse Gallagher, and Casa Rosa. Find links to all of this and more at What'sHerNamePodcast.com. Thank you so much for donating, and thanks for listening.